Make every night a wonderful journey, no matter where you are. Good night, sweet dreams. The first story, Near-Death Experience. The following was found in a cavern near Sailor de Uyuni, Bolivia. It is a giant's all flattened in the summer. It forms a massive mirror. The cavern is widely known as the border between heaven and earth. Scientists and other investigators widely believe this pasta to be a hoax, as it is not scientifically possible. Other spiritualists and open-minded people believe it was dropped by the writer on his way to heaven. I was happily married for several years. I had a very loving wife. We would be there for each other through our ups and downs. We even stuck by each other when we discovered my wife was infertile. It was a shame, but as long as we had each other, we knew we would be okay. One day, my wife was shopping for groceries, and as she finished packing, she sat in the driver's seat of the car, pulled away from the parking lot and drove onto the road nearby. As it was a generally busy road, she had to keep her wits about her when looking for good times to pull out. As she found a good time to pull out, further up the road a car was coming closer at an exceptionally fast speed, with many siren sounds behind it, as the driver of the speeding car slammed the brakes when realizing a car had just pulled out in front of him. It was too late. Ambulances and paramedics were on the scene before too long and discovered my wife alive, but comatose. About a year later, my wife woke up to me leaning over her bedside. She gave a weak smile and spoke quietly. "Hello, darling." I was so relieved to hear the voice of my wife again after so long. I figured things would finally return to normal, and we could put the experience behind us. Everything was okay. My life was getting back on track. Slowly, but a few weeks later, I noticed something wrong. My wife would often lie on our bed, sobbing uncontrollably. Sometimes she would walk around the house, completely naked, with her eyes wide and pupils dilated heavily. Someday, she would even hit me with strength I didn't even know she had. All this happened late at night. The feeling of no longer being in control of myself and being forced into submission was getting too much. I visited a therapist and noticed nothing wrong with me or my wife. Even cameras set up at night didn't show anything. My wife was normal for the cameras, but I hid them so well. I eventually had enough and filed for divorce. I couldn't take it anymore, and I knew I would be happy with someone else. My wife apologized for her actions, and she claimed she didn't know what came over her. In fact, she didn't remember anything. I didn't take the bait and went through with the divorce. I moved into a house with a friend, not too far away from where I used to live. My wife owned the house. I was called to my workplace late at night to work on urgent and finished papers. I grew more and more tired, but had to remain focused on the road during my drive home. I grew more and more attentive to the road as I hadn't seen another car since I left the workplace. My headlights flickered off, and when they flickered on again, there she was. My wife was stood in the middle of the road, her arms stretched out wide, and she was smiling at me sinisterly. I knew I couldn't brake in time, but I had to try. What I saw next frightened me. It was blurry. I was bleeding out. My wife was fine. Nothing happened to her at all. When ambulance crews arrived on scene again, she acted frustrated and in shock, and rode the ambulance with me to the nearest hospital. On the journey, my vision grew rose, but I could still see my wife, with the very same sinister smile. She loved all this. I could see it. I was put in intensive care, and that is when my story ends. My EE began to beat faster. when I blinked once and my wife was stood by my bedside, looking down at me with her trademark, as every life support I had was torn out one by one. As I slowly died, she leaned closer to me and whispered in my ear, "I love you, honey." The second story. Am I crazy? I suppose I should start by telling you a little about myself. I am 19 years old. I live in Pennsylvania. And I guess I've always been a creative person. When I was little, my parents would remark about what a vivid imagination I had. For the most part, I was a normal child. I liked drawing and writing, and I hated math. I had trouble making friends, so I played with my imaginary friends. We would play games out. In the wood, play games out. I always liked playing with these friends, because I knew I could trust them, control them. I knew they would never hurt me, not like the other beings that I thought up in my head. Or at least I think they were just in my head. I used to have a lot of trouble sleeping at night. I would always get out of bed and get snacks, or watch TV, or play with one of the cats my family would rescue. You see, my mom was a veterinarian, so she would take in stray cats, nurse them back to health, and then adopt them out. It drove my parents nuts for me to stay up so late. Everything was fine until one day, when I was about 9 or so. I was up late at night, as per usual, when I was playing downstairs. I was playing with a recent rescue animal, who we called Jacob. What were you expecting, Fluffy? For whatever reason, I was drawn to the large glass doors leading to the backyard. I normally would never go outside at night, and the curtains covering them were always shut. This night, however, I felt the urge to go outside. I opened the curtains, almost expecting to see someone or something to be there, staring in, but nothing was there. I started to feel a bit braver, so I opened the door and stepped outside. Jacob in tow. This is when things got bad. See, behind my house is a large field. It passed that a forest, none of that was visible. We live in the middle of nowhere, so there were no street lights. Nothing, only empty space. And for some reason this empty space was calling to me. Somehow, I walked into the abyss. I felt a breeze against my face, which smelled like honeysuckle and sage, Mom's garden. I kept walking until, out of the darkness, I saw something walk towards me. It was glowing a pale white. My first thought was a ghost of some sort. But this was different, more physical. It had a vaguely humanoid shape, but where the eyes were, there were only black orbs. On this pure white from, almost like it was absorbing the darkness. I wasn't even sure if it was getting closer or bigger. I finally broke out of my trance and ran back inside, slamming the door behind me. I took a breath, and then was drawn to look back outside. It was there, right there, staring in. I shut the curtains and ran back, screaming, to my room. My parents woke up and found me in my room. They yelled at me about being up so late, and about how my dad has to be up early tomorrow. I, however, was just glad to be alive and safe. Jacob was gone forever, consumed by the thing. When I told my mom the next morning, she said I was probably tired and imagined if the Jacob ran away when he was let out and that we'd see him again. When we didn't, she tried to tell me that he must have found a home. I knew she was lying. For a while there was that, but ever since I have always made sure that all curtains are closed after sunset, and to never, ever go out after dark. I went away to college a year ago, coming back home for vacations. A few nights ago, while at home for Christmas break, I decided to go outside late one night for a smoke. Momentarily forgetting my childhood experience, the air was freezing cold, but the cigarette momentarily warmed me. It formed the only light in this darkness, and soon it appeared again. I ran back inside, just like before. Since then, I keep having nightmares that I will look out a window to see it. Its black, shadowy eyes as though consuming your body. I'm starting to lose the ability to tell my dreams from reality. I just want to know if I really saw that thing, if it's haunting me, or if it marked me in some way. My friends think I'm crazy, but do you think I'm crazy? The third story holds. It began slowly, innocuously, although the first appearance was quite sudden. There was no warning, no dent. It was just there, as if the small little hole had always belonged on my calf, as though it had always been there, and always would. I first noticed it, and after a quick moment's inspection, I thought that I should visit the doctor soon. Then I went about my day, and it promptly left my mind. The next time I noticed, I chided myself for not making an appointment, and once more thought to do so. However, this time, it seemed fascinating, sickeningly so. On the outside of my left calf was this small, although rather too large, hole. It was perfectly circular and completely black. It was as if no light could penetrate it. I studied it for hours, twisting this way and that, trying to see if there were more. I even used a torch to try and find what the cause was. The hole was too deep to see completely into. What I could see was regular looking skin, and the rest faded into shadow. There was no redness, no swelling, and no pain. Once I had satisfied my morbid curiosity, I went to the phone to call the doctor, but on my way, it slipped my mind one moment. I was striding confidently, if a little panicky, towards the phone. The next, I stopped, paused, and wondered who I was going to ring. It seemed every time I saw it, I immediately remembered. But once it was out of my sight, it left my mind. This went on for a few days. Then another began to appear. I could see a small dent, perfectly circular, and watched as, over a few hours, it deepened. It happened imperceptibly. I was only aware of it if I looked away and back again. But, curiously, each time I looked away, I momentarily forgot what I was looking at. They were completely erased from my mind. I can think of numerous times I glanced at my calf and saw nothing but smooth, slightly hairy skin. It was a week before I noticed them again. This time there were 7 they had taken. On a slightly honeycomb shape, thin walls of skin separated each one. I used a magnifying glass, but could not discern their cause. The only thing I was sure of was that they were there, and they were not pores. When I next saw them, I was shocked and horrified. I counted 15, and what appeared to be 3 more. Their overall honeycomb shape became more apparent. I stared at them for hours, moving this way and that. Seeing how they would react, they seemed to compress slightly if I stood. As though weakened, they could no longer support my weight. I went to bed troubled, but unsure of what. I had written down, "Call a doctor about your calf," NOW, on a piece of paper. But when I looked at it again, the writing was scribbled out, obscured by thick, black marks. When I awoke the next morning, I felt a strange sensation in my calf swinging out of bed. I glanced at the sheet and saw a strange, yellowish liquid that had soaked into the sheet where my calf had rested. The residue seemed sticky, almost mucus, while the area around the holes had a sheen and the skin was also coated. Counting, I found 34. I tried not to gag at the sight, The sensation returned, more uncomfortable than before. Quickly, I grabbed the flashlight and tried to see what it was, but I still could not penetrate the depths of those damn holes. Quickly, I looked for something, anything, that was thin and long. I noticed that as I walked, my left leg seemed to sink slightly as my weight was put on it, like a spring under pressure finding a thin needle. I carefully pushed it into one of the holes, slowly, so as not to accidentally stab myself. As it went deeper, the golden yellow liquid oozed around it, becoming thicker and faster flowing, the deeper the needle went. Finally it stopped. However, I could not feel the tip. I could feel the sides of the needle, but nothing else. I pushed it further and felt something rising. Ever so slowly, I pulled the needle from my flesh, dragging more of that disgusting goo with it. A slight smell of rotting fruit filled the air, vile but with a sweetness to it. As the needle had left my flesh, I retched and vomited. On the end of the needle was a small black worm, wriggling as it died. As I watched the creature that had lived in my leg squirm, I realized what the sensation was. It was coming from each and every one of those holes. Something was inside each one. Something was squirming in each one. Something was burrowing deeper. In each one, shudders pulsated through my body. As I tried not to vomit again, I stared at that tiny dying creature, unable to look away. There was no time to think, only to act. I made my way to the kitchen and, grabbing a sharp knife, I sat down and set to work. First, I cut through the tiny pockets of skin, allowing the holes to become one. Then I dug out each and every one of the vile creatures. The deeper I dug, the more I found blood began to flow freely and fill the hole I had created. I limped to the bathroom, barely able to walk as I sat on the side of the tub and grabbed a hose. I could feel them inside me, hundreds, perhaps thousands, all gorging, turning the water on. I rinsed the wound clean, clearing my field of vision. As the blood cleared, I saw them, a writhing mass, living inside me. Occasionally, one would fall from the group and, squirming, would be washed down the drain. At first, I used the knife to try and remove them. Then, my fingers. I felt something sharp bite into my hand. One of them had attached themselves to the tip of my index finger. With a shout of horror, I cut it away from my flesh. I carefully cut until I found tissue. Then I began to saw, hacking away, trying to remove as much as I could. Clumps of those insidious things fell from my leg. My vision grew cloudy, and shooting stars of red and black flashed across my eyes. I knew I was going to pass out soon, and still I tried to work, faster and faster, trying to finish the horrific job. I remember breathing deeply, then darkness. I woke in the hospital. An untold amount of time had passed. A delivery man had looked inside my window to see if I was home and had seen a trail of blood. He had called the police. I tried to explain my actions to the doctors. They didn't understand. There was no trace of those creatures, but I can still feel them. I can feel them advancing, burrowing deeper, gorging on my flesh, thriving in my warm body. Soon they will burst forth. I will have to stop them somehow. I will.